Welcome, dear listener, to another quiet evening with Sleepy Wilds. Settle in, dim the lights if you haven't already, and let your body sink into the mattress beneath you. Tonight, we drift into a gentle forest at dawn, where mist still clings to old oak bark, and we follow the story of one small, determined bird whose entire life seems to defy a very simple rule of physics. Tonight we ask a question that has quietly puzzled scientists for generations: why does a woodpecker never get a headache? Across the next few parts, we will wander slowly through its skull and brain, its remarkable tongue, its senses, its hunting and nesting habits, and the long, patient story of how it came to live a life built entirely around repeated impact. There is no need to remember any of it. Just let the words settle over you like a soft blanket, one gentle detail after another. A single sound begins to echo through the trees, a soft, rhythmic knocking, steady as a heartbeat, rising from somewhere high in the canopy. It is the woodpecker, beginning its day the only way it knows how, striking its beak against solid wood, again and again, faster than the human eye can comfortably follow. To watch this small bird at work is to witness something that seems, at first glance, almost impossible. Each strike against a tree trunk can generate forces many times greater than what would cause a concussion in a human being, and yet the bird flies on unaffected, ready to strike again within moments. For centuries, this simple observation puzzled naturalists and casual forest wanderers alike, and tonight, slowly, gently, we will uncover the quiet answer hidden inside its skull, and the long evolutionary journey that shaped it drop by drop, generation by generation, into the small, tireless architect of sound we hear tapping through the trees this morning. Before we go further, let us take a slow breath together, and picture the shape of tonight's journey. We will begin, in a little while, with the architecture of the skull itself, the bone, the fluid, the careful spacing that protects a brain from forces that would harm almost any other creature. From there, we will move gently into the tongue, a structure so strange and so long that it wraps, quite literally, around the inside of the bird's own skull. We will speak of the eyes, built with their own hidden shock protection, and of the tail and feet, engineered like a tripod to hold the bird steady against a vertical trunk. Later, as the night deepens, we will wander into the woodpecker's world beyond its body, its search for hidden insects beneath bark, its curious method of storing food for the colder months, its drumming as a form of language rather than mere feeding, and finally, the older stories, the myths and folklore that different cultures have quietly woven around this small, persistent bird across centuries. There is nothing to hold on to here, nothing to memorize. Simply let each idea drift past you like driftwood on a slow river, and if your eyes grow heavy before we reach the end, that is exactly as it should be. Think of tonight not as a lesson, but as a slow walk through a quiet forest with an old, patient guide beside you, someone who has spent a lifetime watching this one bird and is finally ready, unhurried, to tell you everything gathered along the way. There is no test at the end, no need to keep track of what has been said. Only the soft rhythm of one true detail following another, carrying you gently towards sleep long before we ever reach the final word, drifting somewhere between the misty forest canopy and the dark, warm, quiet stillness of your own room tonight. And so, with the shape of our journey gently laid out before us, let us finally step inside the forest itself, and inside the small, feathered body that has fascinated scientists for so long. Picture, for a moment, an old birch tree standing at the edge of a clearing, its bark pale and peeling, catching the first thin light of morning. A woodpecker lands on its trunk, claws gripping the bark, tail pressed firmly against the wood for balance. It tilts its head back, and then, without hesitation, strikes forward, a motion so fast that even slow-motion cameras struggle to fully capture its violence. The sound cracks through the still morning air, sharp and clean, then fades into silence, only to begin again a heartbeat later. This single motion, repeated thousands of times across a single day, is where our story truly begins. Because somewhere inside that small skull, forces are being absorbed, redirected, and dissolved by a structure so elegant that it almost seems designed on purpose, rather than shaped slowly by the patient, indifferent hand of evolution across millions of quiet years. Somewhere in a nearby marsh, reeds sway without hurry, and a heron stands motionless in shallow water, as if the whole forest has agreed, for this one quiet hour, to move a little slower than the rest of the world. Let us begin, gently, with the skull itself, the very first piece of this quiet puzzle, and the place where our patient guide always chooses to start when telling this particular story, for it is here, in bone and shape and quiet architecture, that the entire mystery of the woodpecker's resilience truly begins to unfold before us, slowly, patiently, one soft layer at a time. The way soft morning light unfolds itself slowly across a forest floor still damp and quiet with dew. The most obvious clue to the woodpecker's resilience lies in its skull itself, which is unlike that of almost any other bird. Where a human skull holds the brain in a relatively loose cushion of fluid, the woodpecker's skull is thick, slightly spongy, and packed with a dense, honeycomb-like bone structure. This spongy bone, found particularly at the front and back of the skull, behaves almost like a natural shock absorber, spreading the force of each impact across a wider surface rather than letting it concentrate in one place. Beneath that bone lies another quiet detail. Very little cerebrospinal fluid surrounds the woodpecker's brain compared to other birds. In humans, this fluid allows the brain to move slightly within the skull during a sudden jolt, which is part of what causes concussions. The woodpecker's brain, by contrast, fits snugly against the inside of its skull, with barely any room to shift. Less movement means less shearing force on delicate neural tissue, and so, strike after strike, the brain simply does not move enough to sustain injury. There is also the shape of the brain to consider, small, smooth, and oriented so that impact forces spread evenly across a broad area rather than focusing on one vulnerable point, much like a seatbelt spreading force across the chest rather than a single strap cutting into the shoulder. There is one more small detail worth resting on for a moment. The woodpecker's skull and beak are not rigidly fused together the way one might expect. A thin layer of slightly elastic, spongy bone sits between them, acting as a kind of cushion, absorbing a portion of the shock before it ever reaches the brain at all, quietly doing its work with every single strike of the day, unnoticed, unthanked, and utterly essential. Researchers who have studied these skulls using high-speed cameras and detailed CT scans have found that a woodpecker's brain experiences forces during drumming that would very likely injure a human severely, perhaps even fatally, if endured even once. And yet no clear evidence of lasting brain damage has been found in these birds, even in individuals that have drummed steadily for years across many breeding seasons. It is a quiet reminder that evolution often solves problems not through brute strength, but through patient, elegant engineering, refined slowly across countless generations of trial, error, and survival. Some scientists have even studied woodpecker brains after death, searching carefully for the kind of protein buildup associated with repeated head trauma in other animals. The results have been reassuring, if not entirely conclusive, suggesting that whatever mechanism protects these birds, it appears to work remarkably well across a lifetime of daily impact. Picture, for a moment, a still pond deep in the same forest, its surface untouched by wind, reflecting the pale gray sky above in perfect, unbroken silence, a small reminder that stillness and motion can exist side by side in the same quiet world, each shaping the other in ways we rarely stop to notice. It is worth remembering, too, that this protection is not absolute. Woodpeckers do occasionally suffer injury, and drumming too intensely, on the wrong surface, at the wrong angle, can still cause harm. Nature's engineering here is remarkable, but it is not magic. It is simply a very finely tuned balance, refined just enough to make an extraordinary daily habit survivable, not a perfect shield against every possible outcome that life in the quiet forest might eventually present. Beyond the skull, another quiet marvel waits within the woodpecker's body, its tongue. Unlike almost any other bird, the woodpecker's tongue is extraordinarily long, in some species stretching out to nearly a third of the length of the entire body. Such a tongue could never simply sit inside a normal mouth, and so, over millions of years, evolution found a strange and elegant solution. The tongue-supporting structure, called the hyoid apparatus, does not stay in the mouth at all. Instead, it splits into two thin, flexible bones that travel backward, curl around the base of the skull, and in many species, wrap all the way up and over the top of the head, finally resting near or even inside the right nostril. When the woodpecker needs to reach deep into a tunnel bored through wood, this coiled structure simply uncoils, extending the tongue far past the tip of the beak to search for hidden insects. The tip of the tongue is often barbed and sticky, coated in a thin layer of mucus, perfectly designed for capturing larvae and insects hidden deep within narrow tunnels invisible from the outside. And remarkably, this same coiled tongue structure may offer yet another quiet layer of protection, wrapping snugly around the skull like an internal cushion, further absorbing shock with every strike against the wood. Some researchers have compared this coiled tongue to a kind of internal safety harness, wound gently around the skull, helping to stabilize it during each rapid impact. It is a strange thought, that the very organ used for feeding might also, quietly, be helping to keep the brain safe, two purposes folded neatly into one small, flexible structure that most people walking quietly through a still forest would never even pause long enough to think about at all. The eyes, too, hold a quiet piece of this puzzle. A fraction of a second before the beak makes contact with the wood, the woodpecker's eyes close completely, protected by a thick third eyelid known as the nictitating membrane. This inner eyelid sweeps across the eye just before impact, holding it firmly in place and shielding it from tiny wood fragments that scatter outward with each strike. This closing serves another purpose as well. Many researchers believe it may help keep the eyes from bulging outward under the sudden force of impact, much the way a small strap might hold something gently in place during a sudden jolt. It happens so quickly, and so consistently, that high-speed cameras were needed before scientists could even confirm exactly when, in that fraction of a second, the eyelids actually close. Consider, for a moment, a slow-moving stream nearby, sunlight scattering softly across its rippled surface, small stones visible beneath clear, unhurried water, a gentle reminder that even the most rapid, violent motion in nature is often paired, quietly, with an equally precise moment of protection and stillness. Beyond protecting the eyes from debris and pressure, this reflex likely serves one more purpose that feels, in its own small way, deeply practical. It keeps the woodpecker from being blinded, even for an instant, by the shower of tiny wood chips that fly outward from the tree with every single strike of the day, allowing it to see clearly again the very moment its eyes reopen. Some ornithologists have gone so far as to suggest this closing reflex is timed with such precision that it functions almost like a built-in pair of tiny, natural safety goggles, blinking shut and open in perfect rhythm with the bird's own relentless, steady drumming against the trunk. Just below the head, the woodpecker's body holds another quiet piece of engineering, one easy to overlook amid all this talk of skulls and eyes: its feet and tail. Most woodpeckers have what is known as a zygodactyl foot, meaning 2 toes point forward and 2 point backward, unlike the 3 forward, 1 back arrangement seen in most other birds. This unusual grip allows the bird to cling firmly to a vertical trunk, distributing its weight evenly and resisting the backward force generated by every strike of its beak. The tail plays an equally important role, though it rarely receives the same attention. Stiffened feathers, reinforced with unusually strong shafts, press directly against the bark, forming a kind of third leg beneath the bird. Together, the 2 feet and the tail create a stable, triangular base, a tripod, in effect, that holds the entire body steady and prevents the recoil of each strike from throwing the bird backward off the tree. It is a small, unglamorous detail, easily missed by a casual observer, and yet without it, the elegant protection built into the skull and eyes would matter very little, since the bird would simply be unable to stay in place long enough to strike the wood at all. Picture, for a moment, a quiet clearing where fallen leaves rest undisturbed on the forest floor, gathered slowly over many still autumns, layer upon patient layer, until the smallest breath of wind lifts one gently into the air, then lets it settle again exactly where it began. Scientists studying woodpecker movement have noted this tripod stance is not simply passive support, but actively engaged muscle work, tensing and releasing in perfect timing with each strike, so the whole body, beak, skull, tail, and feet, moves almost as one coordinated unit, absorbing force the way a well-built structure resists the sway of wind. It would be easy to assume that all this drumming exists purely for feeding, a means of breaking into wood to reach hidden insects beneath. But much of the woodpecker's drumming has nothing to do with food at all. It is, in fact, a language, a way of communicating across long distances through dense forest where sound travels further and more reliably than sight ever could. Each species tends to have its own distinctive drumming pattern, a particular rhythm and speed that functions almost like a signature, allowing individuals to recognize one another, announce territory, or attract a mate, all without a single note of song. Some woodpeckers even choose specific surfaces, hollow branches, metal signs, or resonant dead wood, purely because of the sound they produce, selecting for acoustics the way a musician might choose an instrument for its particular tone. This drumming can travel remarkably far through still forest air, carrying the bird's presence across territory it may never physically visit that day. In this quiet way, the very same skill that could so easily cause harm becomes, instead, a gentle, rhythmic form of conversation, echoing calmly from one hidden corner of the forest to another. Somewhere farther off, a slow current moves through a shallow riverbed, carrying a single fallen leaf gently downstream, turning it over once, twice, then letting it drift onward without hurry, disappearing quietly around a bend lined with smooth gray stones and low-hanging branches. Researchers listening closely to these drumming patterns have even learned to distinguish between species purely by rhythm alone, much the way one might recognize an old friend's knock on a door without needing to see their face, simply from the familiar, unhurried pattern of the sound itself drifting through still morning air. Feeding, of course, remains central to the woodpecker's daily life, and here too, its habits reveal a quiet, careful intelligence. Many species specialize in locating insect larvae hidden beneath bark, using not just brute force but a refined sense of hearing, tapping gently first to listen for the faint hollow echo that reveals a tunnel carved by a beetle grub within. Some species, such as the acorn woodpecker, take this planning further still, storing food for leaner months ahead. These birds drill hundreds, sometimes thousands, of small holes into a single tree, known as a granary tree, each hole carefully sized to hold a single acorn wedged snugly inside. A family group may spend generations maintaining and defending the very same granary tree, passing this quiet inheritance down across many years, refilling holes as acorns shrink or are eaten, in a task that never truly ends. Consider, for a moment, a granary tree standing quietly at dusk, its trunk studded with hundreds of small, dark holes, each one holding its own small store against the coming winter, a patient, communal effort built slowly, one careful hole at a time, across generations of the same watchful family. We have wandered, tonight, from the smallest bones inside a woodpecker's skull to the wide, patient granary trees standing at the edge of quiet clearings, and there is still more waiting gently ahead, its nesting habits, its history, and the old stories woven around it by people who lived beside these forests long before us. For now, though, let this be a gentle resting point. If your eyes are already heavy, dear listener, there is no need to hold on any further tonight, simply let the quiet tapping fade, and drift, slowly, into your own restful dark, exactly the way this small forest around us is beginning to settle too. As we move further into the night, let us turn now toward the woodpecker's nest, a place built with the same relentless drilling we have already come to understand, but shaped this time by an entirely different purpose, not feeding, not communication, but shelter for the next generation. Most woodpeckers carve their nests directly into the trunks of dead or dying trees, choosing wood already softened slightly by decay, easier to excavate yet still sturdy enough to protect their young from wind and predators alike. Both parents typically share this labor, taking turns chiseling away small chips of wood over several days, sometimes longer, until a deep, rounded chamber forms within the trunk, often widening slightly near the bottom to cradle the eggs safely. Unlike many birds, woodpeckers rarely add soft lining to this cavity, relying instead on a bed of fine wood chips left behind from the excavation itself, a floor made entirely from the very material removed to create the space. Consider, for a moment, a hollow tree standing quietly in deep shade, its bark rough with age, holding within its trunk a small, dark chamber built patiently by two devoted parents working slowly through many still, unremarkable afternoons. These abandoned cavities, once the young have fledged and left, rarely go to waste. Many other species, owls, small mammals, even certain bees, later move into these same hollows, meaning the woodpecker's labor quietly shapes the lives of creatures it will likely never encounter, a small, patient act of construction rippling outward through the forest for years after its original purpose has ended, quietly supporting a whole web of other quiet lives in the forest long after the woodpecker family itself has moved on to a different tree entirely. Inside that quiet, hollowed chamber, the woodpecker's eggs rest, typically pure white and slightly glossy, a common trait among birds that nest in dark, enclosed cavities where camouflage patterns serve little purpose. Most clutches contain somewhere between 3 and 8 eggs, depending on the species, laid over several consecutive days rather than all at once. Incubation duties are usually shared between both parents, though in many species, the male takes the night shift, settling into the cavity as darkness falls while the female rests elsewhere nearby. This quiet division of labor continues for roughly 10 to 14 days, until the eggs finally hatch, revealing chicks that are blind, featherless, and entirely dependent on their parents for warmth and food. Growth, once it begins, happens remarkably fast. Within just a few weeks, these fragile hatchlings develop feathers, open their eyes, and begin practicing the very same clinging grip and tail bracing their parents rely on daily, preparing quietly, one small motion at a time, for a lifetime spent balanced against the trunks of trees. Picture, for a moment, a soft gray dawn settling gently over the forest, the first hesitant calls of chicks echoing faintly from deep within a hidden trunk, barely audible above the rustle of leaves. Fledging usually occurs within 3 to 5 weeks of hatching, though young woodpeckers often remain nearby for a while longer, still learning to forage properly, still watching their parents drum and probe bark with the quiet, practiced patience that took an entire lifetime to refine into something so effortless it looks, from a distance, almost like play, rather than the careful, evolved survival skill it truly represents beneath the surface of every gentle knock against the wood. To understand how the woodpecker became this way, we must travel much further back, long before forests looked anything like the ones we know tonight. The family Pisidae likely emerged sometime during the Miocene epoch, tens of millions of years ago, a time when much of the world was slowly shifting from dense tropical forest toward more open, temperate woodland, creating new opportunities for birds able to specialize in extracting insects from bark and wood. Fossil evidence for early woodpeckers remains scarce, since small, hollow bird bones rarely survive the long process of fossilization intact. Much of what scientists understand about their evolutionary history instead comes from genetic studies, comparing DNA across living species to reconstruct a rough family tree stretching back across this immense span of time. What seems clear is that the skull adaptations we have already spoken of, the spongy bone, the reduced fluid, the reinforced beak, did not appear all at once, but developed gradually, small refinement layered upon small refinement, as ancestral birds that drilled only occasionally into soft, rotting wood slowly evolved into the specialized, daily excavators we recognize today, each generation surviving just slightly better than the one before it. Interestingly, not every member of the woodpecker family drums with equal intensity. Some species, such as the wryneck, lack many of these specialized adaptations entirely, feeding mostly on ants gathered from the ground rather than drilling into wood, a quiet reminder that evolution rarely moves every branch of a family tree in exactly the same direction at once, even among close relatives sharing the very same ancient ancestry beneath their strikingly different, quiet modern lives lived out across such different corners of the same wide world. Woodpeckers today are found across nearly every continent except Antarctica and Australia, adapting to a remarkably wide range of habitats along the way. Dense temperate forests remain the most familiar setting, but certain species have quietly carved out lives in far less expected places: tropical rainforests thick with humidity, arid savannas dotted with scattered trees, even cactus-studded deserts in the American Southwest, where the Gila woodpecker excavates nests directly into the soft, water-storing flesh of towering saguaro cacti. This adaptability speaks to just how flexible the underlying design of the woodpecker truly is. The same reinforced skull, the same coiled tongue, the same gripping feet that evolved for hammering into oak and pine work almost equally well against the tougher, more fibrous flesh of a desert cactus, requiring only slight behavioral adjustments rather than any fundamental change to the body itself. Consider, for a moment, a lone saguaro standing tall against a wide desert sky, its pale green flesh marked with a single dark hole near the top, a quiet nesting chamber carved patiently by a bird built for forests, yet perfectly at home here too, beneath a sun far harsher than any it evolved beneath originally. This same flexibility explains why woodpeckers appear on nearly every list of successful, widespread bird families, numbering well over 200 species worldwide, from the tiny piculets of South America, barely larger than a human thumb, to the great slaty woodpecker of Southeast Asia, among the largest in the entire family, each shaped slightly differently by the particular forest, desert, or quiet woodland edge it happens to call home across this wide, quiet, and varied world it has so patiently learned to inhabit over countless generations. Hearing, for a woodpecker, is far more than a simple sense. It is, in many ways, the very tool that guides its beak toward hidden prey. Beneath the bark of a tree, insect larvae shift and chew almost silently to the human ear, yet a woodpecker can detect these faint vibrations, tapping gently first across a section of trunk and listening carefully for subtle changes in the sound that reveal hollow spaces or tunnels carved within. This ability relies on remarkably sensitive hearing, tuned to detect the particular acoustic signature of wood that has been weakened or hollowed by insect activity, sounding subtly different from solid, healthy wood to an ear trained by millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Some researchers have compared this process to a doctor gently tapping a patient's chest, listening for the telltale hollow sound that might indicate fluid or damage hidden beneath the surface, unseen but clearly present to a practiced, attentive ear. Beyond hearing, the woodpecker also relies on a surprisingly fine sense of touch within its beak tip, allowing it to detect subtle changes in wood density and texture as it drills, adjusting its approach in real time rather than drilling blindly forward without any feedback at all. Somewhere nearby, a light breeze moves gently through tall grass at the edge of the tree line, bending each blade briefly before releasing it to spring slowly back into place, over and over, in a soft, unhurried rhythm that seems to match the quiet pulse of the forest itself this morning. Together, sound and touch form a quiet feedback loop inside the woodpecker's hunting behavior, one sense confirming the other, allowing it to work efficiently without wasting precious energy drilling deep into solid wood where no hidden meal actually waits, a small economy of effort refined slowly across countless generations of trial. Long before scientists studied skull structure and cerebrospinal fluid, people living alongside these forests had already noticed something remarkable in the woodpecker, weaving its persistence and rhythmic drumming into stories passed quietly down across generations. In ancient Roman mythology, the woodpecker, known as Picus, was said to have once been a king transformed into the bird by the sorceress Circe, his drumming becoming a permanent, feathered echo of a life he could no longer live in human form. Among several Native American traditions, the woodpecker was often regarded as a symbol of determination and resourcefulness, its steady, patient drilling seen as a reminder that persistence, applied gently and consistently over time, eventually reveals what lies hidden beneath a difficult surface. Some communities also associated its drumming with communication between the physical world and something beyond it, a heartbeat connecting the forest to older, quieter stories. In parts of Europe, older folk beliefs sometimes linked the woodpecker to weather prediction, with its increased drumming activity said to foretell approaching rain, a belief that, interestingly, holds some grounding in reality, since rising humidity can indeed affect insect activity within bark, subtly encouraging more frequent feeding behavior. These old beliefs, gathered from such different corners of the world, share a quiet thread running through them all, an admiration, expressed in different languages across different centuries, for a small creature whose entire existence seems built around patience, rhythm, and the slow, steady art of continuing despite whatever hard surface stands quietly in the way, one gentle strike, one patient generation, at a time, echoing quietly forward through both folklore and forest alike. Beyond myth and folklore, the woodpecker has also found a quiet place in more formal human history. Several species have been designated official state or provincial birds across different regions of North America, chosen as symbols of resilience and industriousness, qualities communities often wish to see reflected in themselves. Its likeness has appeared on postage stamps in numerous countries, a small, feathered ambassador stamped onto envelopes carrying messages across great distances, much as the bird itself once carried sound across the quiet expanse of forest. Early naturalists in the 18th and 19th centuries were particularly fascinated by the woodpecker's apparent immunity to head injury, though without modern imaging technology, many of their explanations remained largely speculative, based on careful observation rather than the detailed scans available to researchers today. Some early illustrations, drawn from careful field study, remain remarkably accurate even by modern standards, a testament to just how closely these patient observers watched the birds they described. Consider, for a moment, an old hand-drawn illustration resting inside a worn leather-bound journal, ink slightly faded with age, depicting a woodpecker mid-strike, captured by candlelight through countless careful, patient observations made long before photography existed at all. These early sketches, however imperfect, formed the quiet foundation for everything modern science would later confirm through skull scans and slow-motion cameras, reminder that patient, careful observation, even without advanced tools, can still lead a curious mind remarkably close to the truth, generation after generation, long before certainty finally, quietly arrives at all, tucked away in worn journals waiting patiently to be rediscovered. In more recent years, the woodpecker's remarkable shock-resistant design has moved beyond pure biological curiosity, quietly influencing fields far removed from ornithology altogether. Engineers studying its skull structure have drawn inspiration for improved helmet designs, hoping to translate the same principles of spongy bone and force redistribution into materials capable of protecting the human brain more effectively during sudden impacts. Some research teams have even developed small devices known as black boxes, modeled loosely after the flight recorders used in aircraft, designed to withstand extreme impact forces by mimicking aspects of the woodpecker's internal shock absorption, exploring whether nature's ancient solution might help protect delicate electronics during sudden crashes or falls. This field, sometimes called biomimicry, reflects a growing recognition among scientists and engineers that millions of years of evolutionary trial and error have already solved many problems modern technology continues to struggle with, quietly waiting, hidden inside ordinary creatures, for someone patient enough to notice and translate that solution into something new. Somewhere deep in the forest, a spider's web catches the first thin rays of morning light, each fine strand outlined briefly in gold before fading gently back into the surrounding shadow of the trees. It is a quiet, humbling thought, that a bird tapping steadily against a tree trunk each morning might one day influence the padding inside a cyclist's helmet, or the casing protecting a fragile piece of equipment falling from a great height, evolution's patient engineering finding new purpose, centuries later, in entirely human hands, in workshops and laboratories far removed from any forest the woodpecker itself has ever known. Despite their remarkable adaptations, woodpeckers today face challenges that no amount of skull architecture or coiled tongue can protect them from, namely, the slow loss of old, dead, and dying trees across much of their range. Modern forestry practices, along with urban development, often prioritize the removal of dead wood, precisely the material woodpeckers depend on most heavily for both feeding and nesting. Some species have adapted reasonably well to human presence, learning to forage in parks, orchards, and even suburban gardens, while others, more specialized in their habitat needs, have seen populations decline noticeably in recent decades. The ivory-billed woodpecker, once found across the southeastern United States, remains a particularly poignant example, with most scientists now believing the species to be extinct or, at best, existing only in exceptionally small, isolated numbers, its haunting call rarely if ever confirmed in recent years despite decades of careful searching. Conservation efforts in many regions now focus specifically on preserving standing dead wood within managed forests, recognizing that what once seemed like untidy, wasted timber actually represents essential habitat, quietly supporting an entire web of species far beyond the woodpecker alone. This shift in thinking, gradual as it has been, offers a gentle kind of hope, a recognition that stillness and decay, so often dismissed as simply the absence of life, can in fact hold quiet, essential value of their own, sheltering generations of creatures within wood that might otherwise have been cleared away without a second thought, quietly forgotten forever before its true, patient purpose was ever fully understood or gently appreciated at all by those passing quickly by. As we come to the close of this particular chapter, let us return, gently, to where we began, that small, steady heartbeat of sound echoing through the trees at dawn. We now understand, in quiet detail, why that sound never seems to cost the woodpecker anything at all. A skull built like a natural helmet, a brain nestled snugly with barely room to move, a tongue coiled protectively around it all, eyes shielded in the fraction of a second before impact, and a body braced firmly like a tripod against the trunk beneath it. None of this happened by design, in the way a human engineer might sketch a blueprint before building. It happened slowly, patiently, across millions of years, one small advantage layered quietly upon another, until an entire body became perfectly suited to a life spent striking wood, day after day, without ever seeming to notice the cost. Somewhere out in that same quiet forest, evening light begins to soften across the treetops, shadows lengthening slowly across the forest floor, the last few calls of daytime birds fading gently into the deepening hush that settles, without hurry, over the whole still landscape. We have traveled far tonight, dear listener, through bone and tongue, through myth and modern laboratory, through nesting hollows and desert cacti alike, all in search of one small, simple answer to one small, simple question about a bird that never seems to tire, and never seems to hurt, no matter how many times it strikes. There is still more we could uncover, deeper stories of migration in a few select species, the quiet rivalries between neighboring territories, the subtle differences between the many woodpeckers scattered across this wide, patient world. But for tonight, let this gentle understanding settle over you instead, soft and complete, like the last quiet light fading slowly behind the trees. Not every woodpecker stays in one place year-round. While most species are considered largely non-migratory, a handful, such as the yellow-bellied sapsucker of North America, undertake genuine seasonal journeys, traveling south each autumn to escape the harshest winter cold, then returning north again each spring to breed in the same forests, sometimes even the very same trees, where they were born. This migratory behavior remains relatively rare within the family, and scientists believe it likely developed independently in a small number of species facing particularly harsh seasonal conditions, rather than representing some ancient, shared trait passed down from a common migratory ancestor. Most woodpeckers instead rely on their varied diet and adaptable foraging habits to endure winter in place, switching from insects, which grow scarce in cold months, towards stored food, tree sap, or whatever else the season happens to offer. Picture, for a moment, a small flock of sapsuckers passing silently overhead against a pale autumn sky, wings beating steadily southward, following a route etched quietly into instinct across countless generations of careful, patient repetition. For the many species that remain in place year-round, winter still demands adjustment. Some woodpeckers shift their foraging slightly lower on a tree trunk, where bark tends to hold marginally more warmth, while others simply expand their diet, accepting berries, seeds, or suet where insects have grown too scarce to sustain them through the coldest, quietest months of the year, waiting patiently for the slow return of warmer, more abundant days ahead, when insects once again grow plentiful beneath the soft, slowly warming bark of the quiet, patient forest around them once again. Despite its remarkable adaptations, the woodpecker is far from invulnerable in the wider forest, facing a range of predators that have nothing to do with the forces it endures through drumming alone. Hawks and falcons occasionally take woodpeckers in flight, catching them during the brief, exposed moments between trees, while snakes, martens, and squirrels sometimes raid nests directly, reaching into cavities in search of eggs or vulnerable chicks. In response, woodpeckers rely on a combination of vigilance, camouflage, and rapid retreat rather than any active means of fighting back. Their mottled plumage, often patterned in black, white, and subtle shades of brown, helps them blend surprisingly well against bark when remaining still, while their habit of moving in short, quick bursts around a trunk, always keeping wood between themselves and a potential threat, offers a simple yet remarkably effective form of natural cover. Nest cavities themselves also provide meaningful protection, their narrow entrance holes carefully sized to admit the parent birds while excluding many larger predators, a small architectural choice that quietly determines, more than almost anything else, whether a clutch of eggs survives to hatch at all. Some species have even been observed drumming rapidly, almost aggressively, when a predator draws near a nest, less a form of communication in this moment and more a startling burst of noise meant to disorient, buying the parent a few precious seconds to defend the entrance or lead the threat away entirely from the hidden chamber within, a small act of quiet courage performed instinctively, without hesitation. whenever the safety of the next quiet generation is placed suddenly at risk beneath the tall, watchful canopy above. While drumming often receives the most attention, woodpeckers also communicate through a range of vocal calls entirely separate from the rhythmic knocking we have spent so much time exploring tonight. These calls vary considerably between species, ranging from sharp, single-note alarm calls used to warn of nearby predators, to softer, more conversational sounds exchanged quietly between mates throughout the day. The pileated woodpecker, one of the largest species found across North America, produces a loud, distinctive call often described as wild and slightly haunting, echoing through mature forest with a quality some listeners find almost primeval, a sound occasionally mistaken, particularly in older recordings, for other, more unusual forest creatures entirely. Young woodpeckers, still confined to the nest, produce their own persistent begging calls whenever a parent approaches with food, a rhythmic, insistent sound that grows noticeably louder and more urgent as feeding time approaches, then fades quickly into contented silence the moment a meal is finally delivered into a small, waiting beak. Some researchers who study these calls closely have noted subtle regional variations within a single species, almost like a soft accent carried between populations separated by mountains, rivers, or simply great distance, a quiet reminder that even something as instinctive as a bird's call can still be shaped, gradually, by the particular place it happens to call home, somewhere beyond the tree line. A distant owl calls once, softly, then falls silent again, its voice absorbed almost instantly into the vast, patient quiet of the surrounding woodland, leaving only the faint, gentle rustle of leaves stirred slowly by the cooling evening air settling quietly over the whole forest. The woodpecker's plumage, often striking in its combination of black, white, and occasional splashes of red or yellow, serves purposes well beyond simple camouflage against bark. In many species, males and females display subtle but meaningful differences, most commonly a small patch of red or yellow found only on the male's head or nape, a feature that plays an important role in mate recognition and, in some cases, territorial signaling between rival birds. Like most birds, woodpeckers undergo a regular process of molting, gradually shedding and replacing worn feathers at least once each year, typically after the breeding season has concluded. This process happens slowly, feather by feather, ensuring the bird retains enough flight capability throughout the process rather than losing all its feathers at once, a gradual renewal that keeps plumage functional even while replacement quietly continues beneath the surface. Interestingly, the particular red coloration seen in many species comes from pigments called carotenoids, obtained entirely through diet, meaning the vividness of a woodpecker's red patch can actually reflect, in subtle ways, the quality and abundance of food available in its particular territory throughout the preceding year. Some researchers studying this connection have suggested that a brighter, more vivid red patch may quietly signal a healthier, more capable mate to potential partners, a subtle form of honest advertisement written directly into feather color, impossible to fake convincingly, since it depends entirely on genuine access to nutritious food gathered patiently across many previous months of quiet, careful foraging throughout the same familiar, quiet stretch of forest it has slowly, patiently come to call home. In the wild, most woodpeckers live somewhere between 4 and 12 years, depending heavily on species, habitat quality, and simple luck in avoiding predators and disease. Larger species, such as the pileated woodpecker, tend to live somewhat longer than smaller relatives, a pattern common across much of the bird world, where body size and lifespan often move together in gentle, predictable correlation. Banding studies, in which researchers place small, numbered rings around a bird's leg before release, have occasionally documented individuals surviving well beyond typical expectations, some living 20 years or more in the wild, a testament to just how resilient these small creatures can be when circumstances allow. In captivity, where predators and food scarcity are removed entirely from the equation, woodpeckers have been known to live even longer still. Mortality among young woodpeckers remains considerably higher than among adults, with many chicks failing to survive their very first year, whether through predation, starvation, or simply the ordinary hazards of learning to navigate a complex forest for the first time without the guidance of a watchful parent nearby. Those that do survive their first winter, however, often go on to live surprisingly stable, settled lives, returning to the same territory year after year, sometimes even reusing or renovating an old nesting cavity rather than starting entirely fresh, a small thread of continuity woven quietly through an otherwise unpredictable existence, year after patient year. In the very same familiar patch of forest it first learned to call home somewhere close by, moonlight begins to filter softly through the upper canopy, silvering the edges of leaves that stir only slightly in the cool night air, the whole forest settling into the same deep, unhurried quiet that follows every ordinary day here. Among the more than 200 species scattered across the woodpecker family, a few stand out for behaviors that diverge sharply from the familiar image of a bird hammering steadily into bark. The northern flicker, common across much of North America, actually spends considerable time feeding on the ground, using its slightly curved beak to probe soil for ants rather than drilling into wood at all, a quiet reminder that even within a single family built around one defining behavior, individual species still find their own particular way of making a living. The Lewis's woodpecker, found in parts of the western United States, has developed an unusual flying style compared to its relatives, gliding gracefully between perches to catch insects mid-air, rather than relying primarily on tree bark for its meals, behavior that looks, at a glance, almost more like a flycatcher than a typical woodpecker at all. Consider, for a moment, a flicker pausing quietly on a sunlit lawn at the edge of a forest clearing, tilting its head to listen closely for movement in the soil below, patient and still, entirely at ease resting here on solid ground rather than clinging to bark. These small departures from the expected pattern remind us that woodpecker describes a family united by shared ancestry and certain physical adaptations, rather than a single, uniform way of moving through the world, each species quietly shaped by the particular pressures and opportunities of its own corner of the forest, developing, over countless generations, its own slightly different rhythm within the same broad, shared story of survival that has quietly carried this whole remarkable family forward across so many millions of patient, quiet, and largely unhurried years of slow, careful change. Territory, for many woodpeckers, is defended with a quiet but persistent determination, particularly during the breeding season when competition for suitable nesting trees grows more intense. Drumming, once again, plays a central role here, functioning as a clear acoustic boundary marker, announcing to any nearby rival that a particular stretch of forest is already spoken for, long before any physical confrontation becomes necessary. When drumming alone fails to settle a dispute, encounters between rival woodpeckers can escalate into visual displays, wings spread wide, crests raised, head movements exaggerated into slow, deliberate arcs meant to appear as large and imposing as possible without ever resorting to actual physical contact. Genuine fighting does occur occasionally, particularly over especially desirable nesting cavities, but most disputes resolve through this careful, ritualized posturing instead, sparing both birds the injury a direct physical confrontation might otherwise risk. Consider, for a moment, two woodpeckers facing one another across the same trunk at dusk, each holding perfectly still for a long moment, wings slightly raised, neither willing to be the first to retreat from ground it believes rightfully its own. Eventually, one bird typically yields, retreating quietly to establish territory elsewhere, and remarkably, once this boundary is settled, it tends to hold steady for the remainder of the season, both birds respecting the invisible line drawn between them without further need for repeated confrontation or renewed displays of aggression, a quiet, unspoken agreement carried forward, day after day, simply through mutual, patient recognition of where one territory quietly ends and another slowly, patiently begins. Interactions between woodpeckers and other forest creatures extend well beyond simple predator and prey relationships. Small owls, including the tiny screech owl, frequently take over abandoned woodpecker cavities for their own nesting purposes, quietly benefiting from labor performed months or even years earlier by a bird they will likely never encounter directly. Squirrels, too, sometimes compete directly with woodpeckers for access to these same cavities, occasionally displacing a nesting pair entirely through sheer persistence rather than any real physical confrontation. Hybridization between closely related woodpecker species, while relatively uncommon, has been documented in a handful of cases, particularly where two species ranges overlap along a narrow border zone. These hybrids sometimes display an intriguing blend of physical traits from both parent species, offering researchers a valuable, natural window into the genetic relationships and evolutionary history connecting different branches of the woodpecker family tree. Somewhere nearby, a family of chickadees moves quickly through the lower branches of a nearby pine, their small calls sharp and quick against the surrounding hush, before vanishing just as suddenly into the deeper shadow of the forest beyond. These small, quiet exchanges between species, one bird's abandoned home becoming another's shelter, one creature's persistence occasionally outweighing another's claim, form a subtle, interconnected web running quietly beneath the surface of the forest, one that most casual visitors walking through never fully notice or pause to consider at all, so absorbed instead in the quiet business of simply moving through the trees toward wherever the quiet day happens to be leading them onward, next. Even now, with so much already understood about the woodpecker's remarkable resilience, scientific curiosity surrounding this small bird continues quietly forward. Recent research using advanced imaging technology has begun to question some long-held assumptions, with a handful of studies suggesting the forces experienced by a woodpecker's brain during drumming may actually be somewhat lower than earlier estimates once suggested, prompting careful, ongoing debate within the scientific community about exactly how much of the credit belongs to skull structure versus other, less obvious factors still being investigated. Some researchers have turned their attention toward the precise biomechanics of the neck and beak, examining microscopic details of muscle timing and bone flexibility that might contribute additional, previously overlooked layers of protection working alongside the skull itself. Others continue exploring practical applications, refining early biomimicry concepts into genuinely usable safety equipment for humans, a slow process requiring careful testing before any woodpecker-inspired design reaches wider practical use. It is a quiet reminder that even a subject studied for decades can still hold fresh questions, patiently waiting for the right curious mind to notice them. Science, much like the slow unfolding of evolution itself, rarely arrives at a single, final answer all at once, instead refining and revising its understanding gradually, one careful study layered quietly upon another, much the way the woodpecker's own protective adaptations were built, patiently, across countless generations of small, incremental change carried forward slowly through the quiet, ordinary, unhurried passage of time itself, one patient season after another. As this quiet chapter draws to its close, let us take one last, slow look at the woodpecker as it truly is, not simply a bird that survives repeated impact through clever anatomy, but a small, complete creature shaped by millions of years of migration and stillness, territory and truce, predator and protector, myth and modern laboratory alike. Every detail we have gathered tonight, from spongy bone to ancient folklore, from ground-feeding flickers to distant hybrid populations along quiet borders, belongs to the same unbroken thread of patient, gradual change. There is something deeply calming, perhaps, in realizing just how much complexity can exist quietly within something so easily overlooked, a bird many people walk past without a second thought, simply because its most remarkable qualities remain hidden beneath ordinary feathers and unremarkable bark. Somewhere out in that same dark forest, the trees stand perfectly still now, holding within their trunks countless small chambers, old and new, sheltering sleeping birds through another quiet, uneventful night, exactly as they have done for so many patient seasons before this one, and will likely continue doing for many more still to come. For tonight, dear listener, that is enough. Let the details drift gently away now, the skulls and tongues, the ancient kings turned into birds, the granary trees and hollow chambers, all of it settling softly into the quiet dark alongside you, needing nothing more from you now than simple, restful sleep, drifting slowly away into your own quiet dark, exactly the way this whole patient forest is settling now, all around us, into its own long, still, undisturbed night, gathering itself quietly around every sleeping creature sheltered somewhere within its ancient, familiar trees. And so, dear listener, our long, quiet journey through the world of the woodpecker finally comes to its gentle end. We began at dawn, listening to a single steady heartbeat of sound echoing through mist-covered trees, and we have wandered slowly ever since, through spongy bone and coiled tongue, through nesting hollows and ancient myths, through ground-feeding flickers and ivory-billed ghosts, through granary trees standing patient at dusk and quiet laboratories still asking new questions even now. We have learned why that small, rhythmic knocking never seems to cost this remarkable bird anything at all, and along the way, perhaps, we have also learned something quieter still, that patience, applied gently and consistently, can carry even the smallest creature through forces that would overwhelm almost anything else, one careful strike, one still season, one small generation at a time. If tonight's journey helped carry you toward rest, I would be so grateful if you considered liking this video, subscribing for more slow evenings like this one, and sharing your own thoughts, memories, or favorite forest creatures in the comments below. I do love reading them quietly the next morning. Perhaps, the next time you happen to hear that same soft, rhythmic knocking drifting through a park or a quiet backyard, you will pause for just a moment, remembering everything hidden gently beneath that small, tireless motion, the bone, the tongue, the eyelid, the ancient stories, the whole patient architecture of survival quietly at work, built slowly across millions of unhurried years. Hidden just beneath a surface most of us rarely pause long enough to truly notice. Thank you, truly, for spending this quiet time with me tonight. Rest now, dear listener. Sleep well, and good night.